Welcome back to week 5 of our Those Trees Quilt Along. This week we finally get to assemble the complete quilt. Can you feel the excitement? It's like piecing together a beautiful fabric puzzle.
Christmas tree, oh Christmas tree, thy leaves are so unchanging.
Let's recap a bit. Last week we sawed all the small trees and appliqued the stars. I hope the applique went smoothly for you and didn't cause you thread issues. So this week we'll saw the quilt top together. I already displayed all the parts which we need. Remember, we have the border strips which we cut in week 2, and then we have the row of large trees. We did that in week 3, and the smaller trees which we did last week. So now we start with sewing together this row with a 1/4 inch seam between each block, and I will go over to my sewing machine to make it happen. But wait a minute, before I take off all the trees, I make a snapshot so I don't get confused about my layout later. So let's start. There is nothing really fancy to do here. It's an easy step. We just join each block with the next one with a hand quarter seam. The large trees are done, and it went really quickly. Now off to the smaller ones. Now, when both rows of trees are finished, there are only 3 vertical seams left. The most difficult one of the 3 seams is of course the one when we join the both rows of trees, because there are so many seam allowances meeting each other, and how we handle that I will show you on my cutting table. You might have noticed that the height of one large tree is the same one as the height of 2 small trees. And that means we have actually matching points here. For the horizontal seams, we have one here and we have one here. And we even have one here where the both smaller trees are joined. And since this seam allowance of the large tree block is already pressed upwards, I want to press that seam allowance of the smaller blocks downwards so that they can easily nest. So I will all my new joining seams now press upwards for the large trees, and for the smaller ones I will then press all downwards. Let's do that. Another tip I have is you flip the smaller trees on top of the larger ones, because that row has more seam allowances, and you want to have the control that your machine foot doesn't catch your seam allowance and flips them back. Also, when you now go through the machine in that direction, most of the seam allowances cannot be caught. And the same is true for the downside. So we now want to pin and nest the 3 matching points first. Here is the end of my large block, and this is the end of my small block. So these both have placed onto each other, and then we make them nest. And we do that for all the 3 matching points I showed you throughout the complete height, and then fill in more pins. So I start here with the first part of the joining seam, and as you can see, most seam allowances point into the right direction anyway, and the same is true for the upper part, so I don't need too much control here. I pressed my long vertical seam towards the larger tree row just because we have less seam allowances here. Next, I will sew on the 2 border strips. It's important that the 2 layers, tree row and border strip, lie completely flat on top of each other. Make sure that your tree rows are pressed flat and smooth. Now let's flip that one over and pin just a middle pin in. And I will flatten it out. Give it another pin at the end. So I said in the beginning, I make my border strips slightly longer so I can adjust them later. That's why they overlap here a little bit. And now I do the same thing with the other half. It's easier for me to smooth out the layers when I have just the flat surface of the border strip, but later I will sew from the block side so I can control the seam allowances here. That's why I flip it now around and fill it with more pins. I think I'm fine with just these couple of pins and go now over to my sewing machine. Then you press your seam allowance towards the border strip, and in the same manner you attach the wider border strip, and ta-ta, your complete top is done. These 2 border strips also give you a wonderful so-called negative space where you can let loose with quilting. Look at these many beautiful examples. Simply breathtaking, right? I mean, who knew that negative space could be so positively fabulous? But there are many more ways to give your Those Trees quilt or your table runner the final touch with quilting. First, my suggestion for the household sewing machine, simple and easy to do. You could sew a grid of vertical and horizontal lines which appear rather random over the entire quilt. Another possibility is crosshatch or slightly curved lines as my sewing machine offers. Or you could use a longarm quilting service. In my first version, I quilted rows of trees. There are similar quilt patterns available. If you Google Christmas tree pantograph, you will find many patterns. I really like the pattern with the mittens, and I will now send my finished quilt top to Rachel Hauser of Stitch and Color to have it quilted with this Christmassy flair. For the binding, choose your favorite method, whether by machine or hand-sewn. If you need a little bit more support with tips, we have a detailed YouTube video on binding where we introduce you to 3 methods and also explain exactly how to get the corners perfect. Because let's be honest, no one wants wonky corners on their masterpiece. I'm looking forward to seeing your progress on Instagram and Facebook. Show us your pictures with the hashtag Those Trees QAL, and as always, there's a prize to be won. Maybe it's just waiting for you. This brings us to the end of our pre-Christmas journey. I hope you had a lot of fun with this great, modern and easy to sew Christmas quilt. Feel free to give us feedback in the comments and let us know what we can do better for you. And when the colder days come, we'll be ready, snuggled under our quilt with a cup of mulled wine and delicious Christmas cookies, enjoying our beautiful new blanket. Stay with us because we have many more new ideas for you. Until next time, happy quilting!